Did you know that before the strict censorship codes of Hollywood, films shocked audiences with beheadings, drug addiction, and taboo relationships? Welcome to the shadow world of early cinema, where movies weren't just entertainment, they were moral battlegrounds that literally caused riots in theaters. Intolerance, 1916. How do you respond when your previous film is accused of reviving the KKK? If you're D.W. Griffith, you mortgage your house, spend a fortune equivalent to $33 million today, and create the most ambitious epic ever filmed. Intolerance wasn't just a movie. It was Griffith's grandiose apology letter to America, and boy, did it backfire spectacularly. Griffith went absolutely bonkers with this one. 4 interwoven stories spanning 2,500 years of history, a literal full-scale recreation of ancient Babylon. The walls stood in Hollywood for decades afterward, and revolutionary camera techniques including crane shots that still look impressive today. The Babylon sequence alone employed over 3,000 extras in a scene that took weeks to film. One actress reportedly died from exhaustion after a 22-hour shooting day. But audiences in 1916 weren't ready for non-linear storytelling. The constant time-jumping between modern America, ancient Babylon, biblical Jerusalem, and Renaissance France left viewers completely bewildered. Critics called it intellectually and emotionally overwhelming. Religious groups were outraged by its humanistic message that religious intolerance was as bad as racial or class prejudice. The film bankrupted Griffith despite its artistic triumph. Theaters struggled to accommodate its 3-hour-plus runtime, and some projectionists, confused by the editing, actually showed reels in the wrong order. In St. Louis, the film was banned after Catholic groups objected to a scene depicting priests celebrating while a woman was executed. What's truly wild is that this commercial disaster is now considered one of the greatest films ever made. Orson Welles and Charlie Chaplin both called it the greatest film ever. Soviet filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein traveled to America just to meet Griffith after seeing it. The mammoth sets inspired Cecil B. DeMille's entire career, all from a film that was originally considered a pretentious, confusing mess. Broken Blossoms, 1919. Before Romeo and Juliet, there was Broken Blossoms, the film so controversial that theater owners hired nurses to attend screenings in case viewers fainted. This tragic tale featured an interracial relationship between a Chinese immigrant and an abused white girl, something that sent 1919 America into absolute meltdown. Director D.W. Griffith cast white actor Richard Barthelmess as the Yellow Man. Yes, that's actually what they called him, in full yellow face makeup. Yet despite this cringe-worthy beginning, the film was shockingly progressive for its time, portraying the Chinese character as gentle, cultured, and spiritual, while the white characters were brutal, ignorant, and violent. This complete inversion of racial stereotypes caused riots in several southern cities. The most disturbing sequence involves the girl's father, a brutish boxer named Battling Burrows, discovering her friendship with the Chinese man. The subsequent beating scene was filmed in such a way that audiences see only the girl's terrified face as she spins in circles, trapped in a closet while her father tries to break down the door. Viewers reported nightmares for weeks. One woman in Boston had a heart attack during this sequence. What really pushed boundaries was the film's unflinching look at child abuse. Lillian Gish, playing the 15-year-old Lucy, researched her role by visiting hospital wards and interviewing abuse victims. Her portrayal was so authentic that social workers began using the film to train new employees. In Philadelphia, a woman stood up during a screening and confessed to abusing her own daughter, leading to one of the first widely publicized child welfare cases in American history. Despite, or perhaps because of, the controversy, Broken Blossoms was a huge commercial success. Griffith recouped his losses from Intolerance and sparked the first serious national conversation about domestic violence in America. The New York Times called it the most artistic film ever made, while religious papers labeled it moral poison of the most dangerous kind. Hexon, 1922. Imagine a documentary about witchcraft that's part scholarly lecture, part horror movie, and part medieval torture exhibition. That's Hexon, the Swedish-Danish film so disturbing that it was banned in the United States for 50 years. Director Benjamin Christensen spent 2 years studying witch trial documents and the Malleus Maleficarum, the infamous witch-hunting manual, to create the most realistic depiction of medieval hysteria ever filmed. The result was a cinematic fever dream that mixed educational content with scenes so graphic they'd be controversial even today. women being stripped naked and tortured, devils with enormous tongues licking nuns, a woman giving birth to demons. One particularly shocking sequence shows a witch kissing a devil's backside in what was cinema's first depiction of the witch's Sabbath. Christensen didn't just direct, he played Satan himself in full makeup, leering at the camera while tempting women to sign his book. The director also appeared as a lecturer, explaining that medieval witches were actually suffering from mental illness, a surprisingly modern take that enraged religious authorities. In America, the film was only allowed to be shown to medical professionals as an educational tool about hysteria. What's truly amazing about Hexon is how it predicted the documentary format decades before it became common. Christensen uses tableaus, reenactments, animation, and even scientific diagrams to make his case, creating the first true documentary horror film. In Sweden, medical students were required to watch it as part of their psychiatric training. Critics couldn't decide if it was genius or trash. Variety called it unfit for public exhibition, while intellectual magazines praised its anthropological approach. When finally released in America in 1968, the film found a new audience in midnight screenings with a jazz soundtrack and narration by William S. Burroughs. Even today, film scholars debate whether Hexon is a serious documentary, an exploitation film in scholarly clothing, or history's most elaborate anti-religious prank. The Phantom of the Opera, 1925. When Lon Chaney's grotesque, self-designed makeup for the Phantom was finally revealed on screen, the reaction was unprecedented in cinema history. Women screamed, men gasped. At the London premiere, one woman reportedly died of shock. Universal Studios had created a marketing campaign warning viewers with heart conditions to stay away, which of course only made everyone more desperate to see it. Chaney, known as the Man of a Thousand Faces, created the Phantom's skull-like appearance using painful techniques he refused to reveal. He pulled his nostrils back with wire, inserted discs into his cheeks, and used chemicals to achieve a corpse-like pallor. The pain was so intense he could only film for short periods. When Universal executives first saw the test footage, they demanded changes, fearing the look was too horrifying for general audiences. The film's production was plagued by bizarre incidents. Sets mysteriously caught fire. Actors reported hearing phantom organ music when no one was playing. The massive Paris Opera House set remained standing on the Universal lot for decades, with stagehands refusing to work there at night due to reported hauntings. Director Rupert Julian was fired halfway through filming after violent disagreements with the cast. Religious groups condemned the film as sacrilegious for its worship of deformity. Medical organizations criticized it for portraying disfigurement as monstrous, yet it became Universal's highest-grossing film of the 1920s, saving the studio from bankruptcy and launching the horror genre as we know it. Audience reactions were so extreme that some theaters hired nurses to attend to fainting patrons. The film's original ending was even darker. Test audiences in early 1925 were so disturbed by the Phantom's death scene that Universal reshot it with a slightly more sympathetic conclusion. The original footage has never been found, though photographs exist showing a significantly more graphic demise. When re-released with sound in 1930, censors demanded even more cuts, creating a version that was nearly 45 minutes shorter than the original. It wouldn't be fully restored until 1996. Noseratu, la 22. This wasn't just a vampire movie. It was the unauthorized adaptation that almost got destroyed forever. When director F.W. Murnau couldn't secure the rights to Dracula, he simply changed the names and made it anyway. Bram Stoker's widow was not amused. She sued, won, and a German court ordered every copy of the film destroyed. Cinema history came within inches of losing one of its masterpieces. Actor Max Schreck's portrayal of Count Orlok was so disturbing and otherworldly that rumors persisted for decades that he wasn't human at all. Some crew members genuinely believed Murnau had found a real vampire for the role. Schreck wore painful pointed ear prosthetics and filed down teeth for hours of shooting, refusing to socialize with cast members even when cameras weren't rolling. The shadow climbing the stairs scene used innovative techniques that weren't revealed until decades later. The film's use of real locations rather than sets was revolutionary for horror cinema. Murnau filmed in actual plague-ravaged towns, abandoned castles, and on the foggy shores of the Baltic Sea. When local villagers discovered the film's subject matter, some refused to participate as extras, believing the production was cursed. Several unexplained deaths among the crew fueled these superstitions. Beyond the Stoker lawsuit, Nosferatu faced bans for its perceived occult content. Religious groups claimed it promoted Satanism. Some theaters refused to show it during daylight hours. In Austria, the film could only be screened if accompanied by a lecture on disease prevention, as authorities worried its plague sequences would cause panic during a real tuberculosis outbreak. Miraculously, a few prints survived the court-ordered destruction. Underground film clubs kept Nosferatu alive through secret screenings throughout the 1920s and 30s. When it was finally recognized as a masterpiece decades later, the same elements that made it controversial, its expressionist shadows, its unflinching look at death, and its portrayal of evil as a disease rather than a supernatural force, were hailed as visionary. Without dedicated film preservationists who risked legal action, this foundational horror classic would exist only in memory. Freaks, 1932. One of us, one of us. That chilling chant comes from the most career-destroying film in Hollywood history. Director Todd Browning, fresh off the success of Dracula with Bela Lugosi, committed career suicide with this horror film starring real carnival performers with physical disabilities. MGM expected a conventional thriller. What they got was a deeply sympathetic portrayal of society's outcasts taking brutal revenge on normal people who betray them. The studio was horrified. Test screenings were disastrous. Audience members screamed, ran from the theater, and one woman threatened to sue, claiming the film caused her miscarriage. MGM chopped nearly 30 minutes from the original cut, footage now lost forever, and still couldn't salvage it. The film that was supposed to be MGM's big horror release was pulled after just a few weeks. What made Freaks truly groundbreaking was Browning's approach. Having worked in actual circuses as a young man, he portrayed the performers with dignity and humanity while showing the beautiful people as the true monsters. The film's infamous wedding feast scene, where the performers accept the beautiful trapeze artist with the chant, "We accept her, one of us," was meant to be touching, but audiences found it terrifying. Censors across America and internationally pounced. The film was banned in the UK for 30 years. In many US cities, it could only be shown if advertised as an educational exhibit rather than entertainment. In some locations, audiences had to sign waivers confirming they wouldn't sue for emotional distress. Critics were merciless. The Hollywood Reporter called it an unpleasant, grotesque aberration. The film effectively ended Browning's A-list career. MGM was so embarrassed they buried it in their vaults. Yet decades later, Freaks found new life in counterculture cinema, with midnight screenings throughout the 1960s and 70s. The film's central message, that physical difference doesn't determine humanity, was revolutionary for 1932 and remains powerful today. Many of the performers later said it was the only film that ever portrayed them as three-dimensional human beings rather than objects of pity or fear. The Public Enemy, 1931. The scene that shocked America wasn't a murder or a shootout. It was James Cagney smashing a grapefruit into Mae Clark's face over breakfast. This casual domestic violence moment caused more outrage than all the gangland killings combined. Women's groups picketed theaters. Newspaper editorials claimed the scene would inspire copycat abuse. For months afterward, men would reportedly bring grapefruits to restaurants and threaten their dates with them. Director William Wellman didn't just glamorize gangsters, he humanized them. Tom Powers wasn't a monster, but a product of his environment, a poor kid who saw crime as his only path to success. This sociological approach infuriated authorities who wanted criminals portrayed as inherently evil. J. Edgar Hoover personally condemned the film as a vicious glorification of the gangster, as a modern Robin Hood. The production itself was controversial before a single frame was shot. Wellman insisted on casting the relatively unknown Cagney against studio wishes, fought to include realistic violence, and demanded the film show the Prohibition era honestly. When Warner Brothers executives saw the rushes of Cagney's electrifying performance, they dramatically expanded his role and reshot scenes to feature him more prominently. Religious groups were outraged by the film's moral ambiguity. The Catholic Legion of Decency gave it a condemned rating. Several cities, including Chicago, where real gangsters reportedly loved the film, demanded extensive cuts before allowing it to be shown. The original ending was even more shocking. Tom's bullet-riddled body was to be delivered to his mother's doorstep on her birthday. Censors forced a slightly less graphic version. The film's release coincided with congressional hearings on the negative influence of movies, with The Public Enemy, Exhibit A, in arguments for stricter censorship. Despite, or because of, the controversy, it was one of Warner Brothers' biggest hits of the year. When re-released after the production code was enforced in 1934, over 10 minutes were cut, including most of the violence and all references to Tom's relationship with women. The uncut version wasn't widely available again until the 1980s. The Story of Temple Drake, 1933. Hollywood had never seen anything like this. Based on William Faulkner's controversial novel, Sanctuary, this film about a Southern society girl's violation and moral corruption was so shocking that Paramount was fined $10,000 for even making it. The film is widely credited as the final straw that led to the strict enforcement of the production code, effectively ending Hollywood's pre-code era. Star Miriam Hopkins fought for the role despite warnings it could destroy her career. She plays Temple Drake, a judge's daughter who flirts with danger until she's trapped in a decaying plantation with a gangster named Trigger. What happens next was only implied on screen, but was clear enough that the film was banned in multiple countries. Hopkins' performance, particularly her dead-eyed stare after the assault, was so disturbing that preview audiences gasped. The film's most controversial aspects weren't just its subject matter, but its moral complexity. Temple isn't simply a victim. She's shown as complicit in her own corruption, eventually becoming the willing companion of her attacker. This nuanced portrayal enraged women's groups who wanted a simpler morality tale. Religious organizations called it spiritual poison. The film was pulled from circulation after just a few weeks. Director Stephen Roberts employed innovative techniques to suggest what couldn't be shown. When Temple is attacked, the camera focuses on a corn-cob doll's face being pushed into mud, a visual metaphor so disturbing that several female reviewers mentioned having nightmares about it. The lighting gradually changes throughout the film, starting with bright southern sunshine and ending in noir-like shadows as Temple's moral descent continues. The film effectively disappeared for decades. Paramount was so embarrassed by the controversy that they never re-released it, and it wasn't included in television packages of classic films. Film historians considered it lost until a print was discovered in the 1980s. When finally screened for modern audiences, critics were shocked to discover not exploitation, but a sophisticated psychological study that anticipated film noir by a decade. Babyface, 1933. Use men to get what you want. With that shockingly blunt advice, Babyface presents perhaps the most unapologetically amoral heroine in pre-code Hollywood. Barbara Stanwyck plays Lily Powers, who literally sleeps her way from the basement to the penthouse of a New York bank, discarding men like used tissues as she climbs the corporate ladder. The film was so brazen about transactional relationships that it was rejected by censors even in the anything goes pre-code era. The original version was even more explosive. Lily's mentor is a Nietzschean cobbler who explicitly tells her to treat men as she's been treated and to crush out all sentiment. Warner Brothers was forced to reshoot scenes, add a moralistic ending, and cut a montage showing Lily's progression through the bank that literally had her moving from one department to the next, higher floor, after each conquest. What truly scandalized 1933 audiences was Stanwyck's performance. She plays Lily not as a villain or victim, but as a clear-eyed strategist, using the only currency society has given her. Her casual disposal of men, including one who commits suicide when she dumps him, shocked female and male viewers alike. After one screening in Kansas City, a woman stood up and announced that the film should be burned. The film's frank acknowledgement of the Depression's economic realities was equally controversial. When Lily's father tells her to be nice to a local politician, she snaps, "I'm through being nice to men for nothing." This transactional view of relationships struck a nerve during an era when many women faced desperate financial circumstances. Some social reformers worried the film would encourage young women to pursue similar strategies. Babyface became a test case for the Production Code Administration. When they finally allowed a heavily edited version to be released, it flopped. Audiences had already heard about the spicier original cut and felt cheated. The film was effectively buried for decades until the Library of Congress discovered an uncensored print in 2004. Modern critics now hail it as a feminist statement ahead of its time, recognizing what 1933 audiences couldn't, that Lily's cold ambition is a rational response to a system that offers women limited options. The Battleship Potemkin, 1925. Soviet director Sergei Eisenstein didn't just make a movie about a 1905 naval mutiny, he created a piece of revolutionary propaganda so powerful that it was banned in more countries than any film of its era. British censors prohibited it until 1954, claiming it would incite racial hatred and revolution. Nazi Germany banned it outright. Even the Soviet Union eventually suppressed it when Stalin decided it emphasized individual heroism over collective action. The famous Odessa Steppe sequence, where Tsarist soldiers massacre civilians, was so shocking that audiences reportedly fainted. A baby carriage rolling down the steps while its mother lies bleeding, a woman shot through her eyeglasses. These images weren't just disturbing, they revolutionized film editing. Eisenstein's montage technique created emotional impact through rapid cutting rather than continuous action, influencing every filmmaker who followed. What really terrified governments wasn't the violence, but the film's effectiveness as propaganda. After screenings in Berlin, dock workers went on strike. In New York, police shut down theaters showing it. A London newspaper claimed the film had directly incited colonial uprisings in China and India. British censors explicitly stated the ban was necessary because the film made the British think. The production itself was remarkably difficult. Eisenstein had no access to the actual Battleship Potemkin, so he used another vessel. The famous scene of maggot-infested meat that triggers the mutiny used real rotten meat, causing several actors to become ill. During the Odessa Steppe sequence, extras were genuinely injured in the crush. Some of the acting on screen is actually real pain and fear. Despite being one of the most acclaimed films ever made, regularly appearing in critics' top 10 lists, Battleship Potemkin was rarely seen as Eisenstein intended until the 2000s. Most versions were heavily censored, with different countries removing different, dangerous sections. The film's revolutionary fervor, once seen as its most problematic aspect, is now often viewed as quaint, while its innovative cinematic techniques remain as powerful as ever. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, 1920. This wasn't just Germany's first horror film. It was a hallucinatory nightmare that predicted the rise of fascism. The twisted, distorted sets weren't just artistic choices, but reflections of a society warped by World War I trauma. Audiences in 1920 had never seen anything like it. Some patrons demanded refunds, claiming the film's bizarre visuals gave them migraines and nightmares. Director Robert Wiene created a world where nothing is at right angles. Buildings lean impossibly. Shadows are painted directly onto the sets rather than created by lighting. The actor playing the somnambulist murderer, Cesare, Conrad Veidt, wore full-body makeup and didn't blink once during filming. The result was so unsettling that several countries delayed release, concerned about the film's psychological effects on already traumatized post-war populations. The film's original screenplay had an even more subversive message. Writers Hans Janowitz and Karl Mayer, both pacifists, intended the story as an allegory about how authority figures manipulate ordinary citizens into becoming killers. In their version, the twist ending revealed the storyteller as sane and the authority figures as truly mad. The studio demanded changes to make the film less politically dangerous, adding a frame story that undercut the anti-authoritarian message. Caligari sparked medical controversies as well. Some psychiatrists claimed the film dangerously misrepresented mental illness, while others praised its expressionistic depiction of how psychosis actually feels. In France, several asylums reported patients developing Caligari delusions after viewing the film. The American Medical Association unsuccessfully petitioned for restrictions on who could attend screenings. What's most fascinating is how the film's reception changed with historical context. Initially seen as merely bizarre, by the 1930s critics recognized its prescient warning about charismatic leaders controlling sleeping populations. Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels admired the film's technique but banned it for its degenerate art style. After World War II, Caligari was reassessed as a prophetic vision of totalitarianism, with Dr. Caligari viewed as a Hitler-like figure, arriving before Hitler himself. Scarface, 1932. Director Howard Hawks didn't just make a gangster picture. He created a blood-soaked epic that terrified censors and delighted audiences. Producer Howard Hughes deliberately pushed boundaries by including more violence than any previous film. 28 on-screen murders, shocking for 1932. The original script contained the word kill 44 times, which censors demanded be reduced to just 5 mentions. The film's troubles began before shooting started. Real gangsters, sensing their lifestyle would be portrayed negatively, threatened Hughes and the cast. Star Paul Muni received protection after warnings he would be taken for a ride. Chicago banned filming within city limits, forcing the production to recreate the St. Valentine's Day massacre in Hollywood. When the film was finally screened for censors, one reportedly vomited from the violence. What particularly disturbed authorities was the film's amoral glamorization of crime. Tony Camonte, loosely based on Al Capone, isn't punished for his evil, but for his hubris. He's charismatic, ambitious, and sometimes even funny. His signature line when viewing a new machine gun, "Look at that, they're neat," was quoted by teenagers across America, alarming parents and teachers. The film's implied relationship between Tony and his sister Cheska pushed sexual taboos for the era. Their scenes together have an uncomfortable intensity that suggests more than sibling affection. Censors demanded these scenes be cut or reshot, but Hughes and Hawks fought back, eventually compromising by adding a scene where the police chief directly condemns Tony's criminal lifestyle. Hughes turned the censorship battle into marketing gold. He kept the film in litigation for months, generating headlines about the movie they don't want you to see. When finally released with a moral prologue added to appease censors, audiences flocked to theaters. The controversy made it one of the highest-grossing films of 1932. Al Capone himself reportedly saw it and approved, saying, "Hawks did a good job. That's how it was." Birth of a Nation, 1915. No film in American history has been more technically revolutionary or morally reprehensible. D.W. Griffith's 3-hour Civil War epic pioneered modern filmmaking techniques while spreading virulent racism that literally revived the Ku Klux Klan. The NAACP organized protests outside theaters. Riots erupted in major cities, yet President Woodrow Wilson screened it at the White House, calling it history written with lightning. The film's innovations were staggering. The first true feature-length American movie, the first use of night photography, the first massive battle scenes, the first extensive use of orchestral music composed specifically for a film. Griffith invented or perfected techniques like the close-up, cross-cutting, and fade-outs that became the grammar of cinema. Technically, it's one of the most important films ever made. Yet its content is indefensible. Black characters, played by white actors in blackface, are portrayed as animalistic, simple-minded, and sexually predatory. The Klan rides in as heroes to save white womanhood from these caricatures. After its release, Klan membership exploded nationwide. In fact, the modern Klan's burning cross symbol wasn't historically accurate. It was invented by the film and adopted by the real organization afterward. The controversy was immediate and explosive. In Boston, Black attorney William Monroe Trotter led protests that turned violent. Theaters in Chicago and other cities were bombed. Many municipalities tried to ban the film outright. The NAACP launched its first major national campaign against it, publishing a pamphlet titled "Fighting a Vicious Film" and organizing boycotts. Remarkably, these protests marked one of the first times Black Americans effectively used mass media to fight for civil rights. Griffith, genuinely shocked by the backlash, spent the rest of his career trying to prove he wasn't racist. His next film, Intolerance, was partly an attempt at atonement, yet Birth of a Nation remained his most commercially successful work, playing continuously in some Southern theaters into the 1930s. Film historians still struggle with its contradictory legacy, a technical masterpiece that caused tangible harm to American society. The movie that invented Hollywood's visual language also revealed its moral blindness. From accidental controversies to deliberate provocations, these films pushed boundaries in an era when cinema itself was still being defined. Which of these shocking classics surprised you most? Did you know the Hays Code that dominated Hollywood for decades was created specifically to prevent more films like these? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And ask yourself, in an age before content warnings and rating systems, would you have been brave enough to buy a ticket to these groundbreaking, boundary-shattering spectacles?